Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 22nd edition of the European Audiovisual Observatory's Cannes Conference. My name is Maya Capello. I am the head of the Department for Legal Information at the Observatory, and on behalf of our executive director, Susanna Nikolchev, who could unfortunately not make it to Cannes this year, and on the whole team of the Observatory, I'm very pleased to see you so numerous and loyal to this Saturday morning appointment. It's early, but you made it all. Thank you for that. This year we will talk about what makes a film successful and which instruments are put in place in order to achieve this objective. There are various policy reasons and goals behind cinema. You know this better than all of us, probably. I could mention cultural diversity, sustainability, or innovation. But I think Robert De Niro said it very clearly the other day when receiving the honorary Palme d'Or for his career. He said, "Art is the crucible that brings people together. Art looks for truth. Art embraces diversity." And I can continue reminding that art has played a crucial societal role since ancient times. The Greek comedy and its use of masks were exactly about irreverence against the power in place and showing the diversity of the people. The question is how cultural diversity can coexist with economic success. The European model of financing culture presupposes state intervention. The state is a big supporter of cinema, and its goal is to promote culture, but also to boost the economy with successful films. During today's conference, we're going to explore two major aspects of this question. In the first session, we will look at what makes a European film successful, with an eye on the profitability in the box office and beyond, and the role of festivals. The second session will be a deep dive into public policies, looking at some of the regulatory tools that are in place, including public funding. We will discuss this with our distinguished guests today. Let me introduce you to Peter Fornstam. Peter is a Swedish exhibitor, founder and director of Svenska Bio, and chair of the Swedish Cinema Association. Mattis Kaja. Mattis is a Latvian producer and co-writer of the award-winning film Flow, including an Oscar for Best Animated Feature and the Lux Audience Award. Agnieszka Moody. Agnieszka is head of international relations at the British Film Institute, BFI. Valeska Noy. Valeska is a German film sales agent, head of management and sales of Films Boutique, and freshly elected president of Europa International. And Huub Roelvink. Huub is a Dutch distributor, founder and managing director of Cherry Pickers Film Distribution, and member of the board of Europa Distribution. The discussion will be introduced by observatory presentations and moderated by my colleague Gilles Fontaine, head of the Department for Market Information at the Observatory, and by myself. And if time allows, we will also have a Q&A session at the end, so stay with us. And now, without much more ado, I would like to ask Martin Kanzler, Deputy Head of Department for Market Information, to please join the stage to introduce session 1.
Thank you, Maya, and good morning, everyone. When organizing a conference about the success of European films, it seems a good idea to start with a short reflection on the definition of a successful film. What defines the success? Now, I think when talking about success, it's a useful idea is that success is meeting a target, achieving a goal. And louder, okay. And a film, respectively, the people behind the film, can hope to achieve a great many different goals with that film. And each of that goal can be used as a success criteria. So films can be successful with regard to certain aims, goals, more than to others. But before getting too philosophical, there are, of course, three criteria that are generally and most commonly used to define the success of a film. The first one would be its financial success, the second one, audience reach, and the third one, festival success. And in order to introduce the panel discussion to follow, I'd briefly like to show for each of those three factors how European films are performing. Let's start with financial success. Of course, in an ideal world, or in reality, financial success should be measured in terms of return on investment, meaning for each individual investor, depending on its investment, depending on its recoupment position and share of the revenues, the return on investment will be different. But of course, for good reasons, we don't have any data on that. So by default, we have to go back one level and to look at the film as a whole. And here, one of the most useful concepts would be the breaking even idea. That is, to which extent do the revenues that are generated by a film cover the costs? As you all know, revenues consist of different blocks, starting traditionally with theatrical, and then the ancillary, or not ancillary anymore, streaming, television, and other ancillary blocks. And the cost side is the production budget, as well as other advertising, distribution, other legal costs. Again, we have a data problem in the sense that out of these blocks, we only have reliable data on theatrical box office and the production cost. But we do assume that those two elements are actually represent the majority block, both on the revenue side as well as on the cost side for European films, and also that those two actually drive the revenues in the other windows, and production costs, I'm assuming, is also correlated to the linked advertising and the distribution investments. So we do believe that it is a justified shortcut to further simplify the equation, to look at to which extent estimated box office covers the production budget. It's a simplification, but the purpose of the exercise is to get a rough idea about how many European films are profitable, in the sense here that they could cover their production budget with theatrical exploitation alone. We do know from the analysis from about 600 to 700 financing plans each year that the average production budget of a European fiction film in small markets is about 1 million, in medium-sized markets 2, and in large markets 3 million euros. Now, if you wanted to recover the entire budget with theatrical only, that would require, in our very simplified estimation, a box office of 2 to 6 million, assuming that 50% goes to the rights holders and the distributors, which would mean that in this, only 1 to 5% of European films would be able to cover their budget with theatrical. Of course, you can argue that not the entire budget needs to be recouped, that, for instance, the part that is being financed with production incentives does not need to be recouped. It's basically free money from the side of the people producing the film. That would lower the cost base and would hence increase the share of European films which would pass that benchmark. You could further argue that pre-sales are in fact advanced sales that already cover costs and do not need to be further recouped with box office, further lowering the benchmark and providing a different bandwidth. And you could finally argue that direct public funding also does not need to be recouped. In some cases it actually doesn't, in other cases it should be. But even in that really extreme scenario where you basically take off 80% of the production cost to be recouped with box office, only a maximum of 10% of European films would pass that benchmark. So I think it's a fair assumption that no matter which benchmark you take, a maximum of 1 in 10 European films would be able to cover its production costs with theatrical, and that is probably way too high. So in conclusion, for the financial success, I would argue that European films, the vast majority of European films, would not qualify as particularly successful. That is, of course, linked to the second indicator, audience reach, but it's not the same. Audience reach is about how many people are going to watch the film. And this may be, for instance, an important goal for public funding institutions whose policy goal is to create films for national audiences. Audience reach is, of course, platform neutral. It doesn't matter where people watch the film. It can be in the commercial circuit, it can be in the non-commercial circuit, can be in cinemas, can be in streaming, TV, or any other platform. Again, we're facing a data problem that we don't have this kind of data for streaming and television, but we do have it for cinemas, and we also know that cinema success has a positive correlation with distribution and success in streaming and the other platforms. So again, we believe that for the purpose of this exercise, it's valid to just look at the theatrical admissions, and the indicator I choose for simplification reasons was to look at the average number of cinema tickets that are being bought for European films. And this is, in absolute terms, comparatively low. So between 22 and 24, on average, about 210,000 people went to see a European film, 130,000 of those on the national market and 80,000 on non-national markets. And this is, of course, significantly lower than for US films, but also significantly lower when compared to Asian films. On the other hand, it is twice as successful as films from Australia, New Zealand, or Latin America, just to put that into perspective. Why is this absolute figure so low? I think the main reason is that the vast majority of European films is targeting primarily national audiences. About 70% of European films sell more than 90% of their tickets exclusively on the national market. So about 70% of films are being seen almost exclusively by national audiences. And national markets in Europe are often very small. So when you have a small market, it's basically impossible to reach a larger audience when you're targeting that audience. And I was just curious, and bear with me, this is a very hypothetical scenario, but I was wondering if you could adjust for market size, how that would look like. So assuming that all the markets were the same size and admissions, national admissions to European film or to all films would either be would grow or be decreased proportionally to that. In that exercise, European films reach actually the largest, proportionally speaking, the largest number of national audiences from compared to any other film worldwide, films from other parts in the world. So I would argue that in terms of audience reach, European films should be considered quite successful in reaching national audiences, not so much outside of their national markets, however. That brings me to the third main criterion, that would be festival success. Here we chose the indicator of festival nominations, and we looked at 12 of the 14 FIAP-accredited competitive feature film festivals between 2018 and 25. And European films accounted for 55% of the nominations in those festivals. This compares to a share in worldwide film production of 31. So European films are overproportionally represented in terms of festival nominations compared to the production volume. So again, here I would argue that in terms of festival success, European films are doing comparatively well and are quite successful. So to conclude, financial success, very limited, partial. but European films are quite successful in reaching national audiences and also in the festival success. Before handing over to the panel, I would just like to point out that those three aspects are the ones that can be easily quantified. But as I mentioned before, there are loads of other goals and that a film can hope to achieve and that can be used to consider a film to be successful or not. And one other really important aspect, I think, is the cultural impact and also the democratic impact of a film. These things are very hard to quantify. The BFI, I know, did a very interesting study on the cultural impact of British films a couple of years back, but it's beyond our scope to do that. But I think when discussing success, it is really important to keep in mind that beyond those easily quantifiable metrics, there are very important other aspects to be taken into consideration. And with this, I'll hand over to the panel.
Thank you, Martin. For this first part of the panel, I would like to dig in a little bit in the concept of profitability and the role of box office cinema exploitation in profitability. And my first question will go to you, Mathis. When you built up, I guess, a few years ago, the financing plan for Flow, was box office essential to recoup the cost, or was it a bonus? How were you in a completely 100% pre-financed model, or did you need the box office at least to break even?
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about the financing plan in general so that people have a context about this. So our film is Latvian, French, Belgium co-production. And our biggest struggle coming from a small country as the majority co-producer was to keep the budget such that we actually remain the majority co-producer. So we had actually in the final financing plan maybe 1 or 2% above France, which was the other biggest co-producer. In order to do this, we had to be smart both about composing the budget and about composing the financial plan. The initial financial plan, of course, changed during the financing process as we had many no's from many institutions, but the basic model was a combination of grants from film centers, then regional funds and regional support on in terms of tax incentives. Then we had theatrical MGs, at least in Latvia we had a theatrical MG. We had an MG from a distributor in France. And then, of course, pre-sales in terms of television and VOD platforms. So it was basically using most of the common sources that are used in general in a very, very smart combination, I think, in the end, that we managed to still retain this majority co-production for Latvia, which wasn't that easy on paper, but in the end it turned out okay. When we were devising the financial plan, actually at that stage we didn't have any indications that the film would be as successful as it turned out in terms of box office, because in Latvia, locally, art house animation, or this kind of animation that's not clearly a Disney movie or in that kind of aesthetic, it's not guaranteed to do well in terms of box office. So we didn't have initially a very big MG from the theatrical distribution, nor did we have very big MGs for world sales or anything else. So it wasn't guaranteed to have this sort of success on paper, because there were so many questions about what's the target audience. Is it for kids or is it actually for adults? And who's going to watch these animals without dialogue? So, you know, it wasn't that we had all this trust initially. It was progressive in the sense that as these distributors and as these funders got to see more of the film and more of the experience of the film, which I think was very important, is that we got we got more trust in the project itself. So the short answer is no, we were not thinking about recouping from box office at the early stages of the financial plan. We were devising it such that it's based on a multiplicity of sources, so that it can also fill this criteria of Latvia remaining the majority producer, despite being a very small industry compared to, say, France and Belgium.
A follow-up question. Taking into account all those pre-sales, is the future of the film in other exploitation already totally written? And to some extent, are you interested, financially speaking, to what will happen after the first run of exploitation?
Yeah, we're interested in seeing the final numbers, of course, because right now we have still kind of limited data ourselves about the film, because it's still in exploitation, it's still running theatrically. But what we're thinking about more is how can we use this success story, and how can we use the brand per se of Flow for the benefit of future projects, and also how can we extend the life cycle of the film through perhaps some ancillary products and things like that, like books or video games and other forms of exploitation for this IP, without necessarily going into sequels, which is something that we don't want to do. We don't want to have Flow 2, 3, and 4. We want to focus on whatever the next project is. But I think it's important to think about also how much VOD can bring in worldwide, and we don't have estimations for that quite yet. But it's very important for us, because those numbers could, because of this, the 50% that the theaters take initially, this number could perhaps even be higher in certain territories than what we get out of the theatrical box office, especially if the territory is quite large and if the license fee in that territory is significant.
Thank you. That's the producer point of view on the film. I would like to turn now to you, Valeska. What does profitability means for a film agent? And from your business model, what do you spend? How do you earn? And when are you profitable when you take charge of a film?
So as a sales agent, we work with minimum guarantees. That means like we pay minimum guarantees to the producers, and ideally we get minimum guarantees from the distributors. So for us, basically, a film starts to be profitable when we recouped our MG, plus our marketing costs, like bringing the films to the bigger markets. It's basically like that. When the MG is recouped, when the costs are recouped, our profitability starts, like in terms of financial, let's say.
And within the sales you manage, how central is the box office, and how important are the other windows?
So let's say for us, basically, I mean, we first concentrate on selling the films, meaning like we first concentrate on the MGs. Of course, when we are acquiring a film, we always need to believe that the film can do great on the box office, because that's basically what we do. We select films in order to make a curation for distributors, and we need to believe in the films that they not only the distributors will like them, but we need to think a little bit of the audiences as well. Yeah. So let's say in first place, we don't think of the box office, but of course, in second place, we need to.
Okay. But here you're talking about MGs from cinema distributors, basically.
Yes.
So the future other revenues, that's a bonus? I mean, selling it to TVs, or will the distributor make the best of that? I'm trying to understand who is doing what between box office and other exploitation windows.
I mean, it always depends a little bit. If you sell the film widely, I mean, our main target is always the theatrical distributor. That's basically the business model. So, and then the distributor would take all rights for his territory. Ideally, the film sells very well to a lot of theatrical distributors all around the world. But of course, if that's not the case, we will try to do TV deals, VOD deals on our own. But I mean, the focus is pretty much on the theatrical distribution, at least from the model, what we are doing.
Thank you. That's an easy transition to Hub, as if I understand correctly, mainly a cinema distributor. But still, as I asked to Valeska, could you briefly explain your business model? How do you make money?
Yes.
When you make money, of course.
That's the the big question.
Yeah.
No, we also pay MGs, and we are in Benelux, which is one of the most competitive territories in the world, I believe. So we compete for films, and of course we compete for the films that we think will be the most successful in the box office. For us, box office success is the key to success and to profitability. And of course, this always relates to the MG that you paid, and we have to also try to recoup our P&A. To recoup the P&A is usually, P&A is a print and advertising cost, sorry, that's a term. That's the cost that we do to release the film in our territory, and we take care of all the marketing. But yeah, so it's a really tricky thing because yeah, I think we are the most risk-taking part of the food chain, so to speak, because of these MGs, and they can go up very high because we see potential success, and if we see it, it's quite likely that our competitors see it as well. And especially at festivals like this, the emotions run high, and we see huge amounts of box office before us, and you know, we hope that we have this massive success, and we all do. And yeah, one of us takes the prize, but then it's the question whether that is a good or a bad thing. But yeah, but we really depend. So to come back to your question in the more basic sense, we depend on theatrical success. I just looked up the figures to make sure that I'm not talking rubbish, but 70% of our turnover is the theatrical incomes. And then I think the follow-up is less than, so it's like TV and VOD combined is 15 to 20%. So it's really, really crucial.
Okay, that's why I've seen in your website you have a catalog concept. That's to target the other exploitation windows, and that's
yes.
What represent those 30% additional sales.
And no less, like 15 to 20%.
52.
And we're hoping to expand it, but well, we also have big problems selling films to TV, for example. The national TV is hardly buying our films, whereas I always think that we have the greatest programming that they can buy for a very cheap price, but they really prefer to produce their own films. And I think for streamers it's also hard because they also produce a lot. Now they have they want to produce their own stuff. Maybe I'm drifting a little bit off my topic, but yeah. So the percentage is still very small, but it could be bigger, I think, yeah, and it should be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Peter, you have a different business model. So does the profitability of an individual film, that makes sense from a cinema exhibition point of view?
Well, for cinemas, it's pretty simple. It's butts in the seat. Mm-hmm. But we are part of an ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So we are very dependent that the rest of the ecosystem works. So for us, profitability is when the producers, the distributors makes money along the road. Because if we end up being the only ones, that ain't good for anyone.
Okay. We do have some figures at the observatory that shows that there is a correlation between success in cinemas and success in terms of VOD usage. About sales, we don't know. My question is, therefore, is the articulation between the different windows working well, so that precisely the success in cinema is correctly leveraged on the other windows?
Well, I think that we all know that movies get knighted at the movie theaters, that the value of the movie in the rest of the exploitation chain goes up if the movie works theatrically. Mm-hmm. The sort of the collapse and the change of the window structure, which happened during COVID. Before that, we had like a unified system for the windowing. Now we have every studio, every distributor has a different model. And I think that confuses the audience. And I think perception is reality, and the audience doesn't get the window structure, and a shrinking window structure I don't think serves anyone very well. So I think that's a problem the industry have now, and I really hope that especially the studios are going to sort of have a more structured, so the consumers doesn't get as confused, because I think that will eat into the theatrical revenue and that will hurt everyone.
Thank you. Agnieszka, trying to wrap up this first part of the discussion on the role of box office in profitability. I remember this 2022 study you commissioned to Alma Economics, and my understanding is that it was showing that the share of box office within the revenues of independent film was rather decreasing. So it's a 2022 study, so it was a peculiar COVID moment. But do you believe it's still the case, and do you believe it's irreversible, this decreasing share of box office in independent film revenues?
Well, we still do have a sort of the problem. We haven't come back to the levels that are pre-COVID. The figures are climbing all the time, perhaps not climbing as fast as in some other European territories. And we certainly agree with the rest of the panel that theatrical absolutely is key. There was maybe the time in the past when we all got excited that perhaps not, that perhaps it's not as important as it was in the past. But all the experimentation on part of many different players across the diverse chain keep proving that cinema is the most important window. Even streamers are discovering that. So the study is absolutely still relevant, and we are trying to address that as the lead agency for film in the UK. And how we're trying to address that is to increase our funding capacity for distribution and exhibition sector. It's already quite diverse, our funding. We are distributors of National Lottery funding, which is one of the major sources of public funding in the UK. And if you look at the kind of breakdown of where the money goes from the BFI, only 40% is actually to support creation, to make more films, to support creators in development and production stages. The other 60% is a mix of audiences, targeted support, skills, heritage, international, all those other things. As you were speaking about the ecosystem, it's this focus on production that sometimes could be holding us up from the European film reaching their success. So there will be, none of those measures are yet introduced, but we are now raising the importance of targeted support for distribution and exhibition.
Thanks a lot. Now, second topic for this session, festivals. So, short question and hopefully short answers on the role of festivals in building the commercial success. Mathis, you had a very strong run-up in festivals. Was it more a recognition of what was happening, or was it essential in building up the success?
Well, for this part, I can say that it was very, very important in our kind of strategy from the beginning to have a strong festival opening for the film. And I think that a large part of the film's further success can be attributed to the fact that it premiered here. It's an animated film that premieres in Cannes, which is already unusual because very few animated films do show here. Second of all, it was in official selection in Uncertain Regard, which is also unusual. It was the only animated film in that section last year. So I think that gave the film a lot of attention. People were thinking, what is this movie about a cat without dialogue? Should I go see it? It attracted a lot of interest from buyers immediately. But it was also, I think it was also the impact of the publicists working here at Cannes, and everybody who was just making sure that the film gets the best treatment here, that it's not just a part of the program, but that it's something that everybody wants to discover, and I think that was also very important. And then further down the line, of course, there were many, many festivals for this film, and many, many awards. And I think what was most important for us was the key festivals in each kind of region or territory. So Toronto was, for example, very important for us, for North America to get those first critics previews, which are very important then for the awards season down the line, because all the critics circles decide upon their awards. So it's a big kind of chain, I guess, of consequences that comes from a very, very strong festival opening. And I think that really was something that we had already written down as a goal in the early stages, and somehow it turned out to be a success in terms of festival distribution, definitely, yeah.
Thank you. Valeska, how important are festival awards and nomination in building up the commercial success of a film?
Well, for us as sales agents, I would say the selection of our films at major festivals is crucial. I mean, that's the beginning. We need a big launching platform for our films. And of course, I mean, Cannes is at the moment, or for a long time, still like the peak. I mean, that's the best. And I think your film will automatically get attention when the film is here. Yeah. Of course, a press agent plays a crucial role, for sure. But we need these. And I mean, for us, ideally, it's festivals that have more or less a market attached. That makes it easier for us. But we need it, we need the platform, we need the press in order to create noise, yeah, and to get the film out there. Afterwards, festivals became more and more, I mean, like I'm working in sales now for 15 years. Back in the days, there was still 35 millimeter prints. So nowadays with the digital, I have the impression there are a lot more festivals, and you can play a lot more festivals as well, because the transportation of the film is easier. No, and depending on the territories, of course. I mean, not all films sell well in the different parts of the world. So a festival run is a crucial thing for a film, in terms of revenues as well, that we will share with the producer afterwards, but also in terms of getting the film out there. So you can almost, especially for smaller or middle-sized films, you can talk of like a mini distribution in itself for the festival run.
Thank you. Hugh, exact same question for you.
Yes, but I guess I can agree with the sales agent. For us, it's also quite crucial. It depends on the type of film. There are some of our films that we buy that are local successes sometimes, which are less festival dependent. But the more art house a film is, you could say, the more important the festivals are. And for proper art house films, the festival launch is crucial. And I think, if I haven't counted, but if I look back in our catalog, I think probably 80 to 90% of our films have premiered in an A festival, I think. Yeah, and sometimes we pick up something that is a little bit under the radar, but most of the films, they really need that launch, because, well, if the more famous a director or a cast is, basically, you could sort of make this equation, the less you might need a festival, because you have something to market directly, so to speak, especially in terms of cast. Or story, or a book, or some kind of part of the IP. But if a film is from a quite unknown director, you know, from some European country, festivals are really crucial. And also locally, we very often use festivals to launch the film locally, and then again do press, invite the director. Yeah, it's a crucial part of the ecosystem and also of our business.
Thank you. Peter, as our festival, or at least a festival, also have an impact in how densely you would program a film, how you would push it?
I think the ones who won a prize at the big festivals helps the awareness of the movie, and helps the movie to find an audience. And of course, there are certain we have a couple of local film festivals, and if a movie gets written about and written up and word of mouth starts to spread, that helps.
Thank you. And finally, Agnieszka, view from the BFI point of view, is the presence of the film you support in the major festival a performance indicator of how well your support is spent?
Oh, absolutely, because as a public funder, we are most concentrated on de-risking, discovering new voices, originality of vision, taking risks, underrepresented groups. These are not necessarily popular films, so they're sort of them being noticed and appreciated at the festivals, such as in Alsator-Gare, we have 3 debuts this year, all supported by the BFI, and that is how we want it. So those directors will go somewhere, and then they will need less of our support, but to help them at this stage is super important. And then I think from the point of view of people who sell and distribute and exhibit films, increasingly in this mass of abundance of availability, festivals are more and more important to signpost and send signal to you guys that these are the films to pay attention to.
May I add one little thing, because it's this way, but it's not the other way around. It's not the fact that festival success guarantees theatrical success. That's very important to note, because there are many films that are very good films and that are selected at A festivals, even in competition in Cannes, that are very difficult to distribute afterwards. So it's not the only thing that matters.
Thank you. That was about festival. Time to move to the second part of our discussion. So up to you, Maya.
Yes, absolutely. And in order to move on to the next layer, the idea is to look into policy goals and tools. And I would like to ask Sophie Vallet, who is the Deputy Head of Department for Legal Information, to join the stage to introduce this second session.
Good morning, everyone. So let's take a closer look now at how public policies influence the film industry in Europe. What are policymakers aiming to achieve? Is the goal to foster cultural diversity by supporting a wider range of films, or is the focus on building a globally competitive industry with commercially successful productions? Can both goals work together? And how do these ambitions actually turn into concrete policy tools and support measures? So let's find out. When we look at the goals behind the EU action in the film sector, we find a dual ambition. First, to promote Europe's cultural diversity, and at the same time to support a competitive and sustainable industry. So to achieve these goals, the EU has put in place a complex framework, policy and legal framework, with copyright directives, state aid rules, laws around territoriality, and at the core of this system, there is the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, or the AVMSD, which sets a rule for audiovisual services across Europe. And this includes important provisions in terms of European content. Alongside, there is the Creative Europe programs that you know in its media strands, which provides direct support to development, distribution, and the promotion of European films. So all of these tools are based on a set of key principles. First, that films are supported as a cultural and artistic expression. Then the independent producer, the one who owns the rights and who has the creative control, is at the core of this system. And rights are typically exploited first in theater and on a territorial basis within national or regional market. So in short, we can see that the aim is to have a balanced approach, supporting culture while boosting at the same time the industry strength. But how are these principles put into practice at national level? Do all the member states understand and apply these in the same way? Well, not exactly. In fact, there is quite a lot of variation among countries. That's because the member states have some flexibilities in how they implement the EU rules, allowing them to tailor the policies to the specific needs of their own film and audiovisual ecosystems. So on top of that, we have seen that also new policy objectives emerge at the national level, policies and objectives that respond to broader societal issues. These are increasingly being integrated into national state aid schemes for audiovisual production. So these new priorities include the promotion of environmental sustainability, the promotion of diversity and gender equality, the pursuit of international artistic recognition, or the encouragement of innovation or the improvement of accessibility for people with hearing and visual impairment. So while the EU sets this common EU framework, we can see that there is a dynamic space at national level where countries can adapt and extend these principles to reflect their own values and priorities. So we will have a look now closely to some examples of this variety of approaches through something that you may all know, the quotas. Since its origin, this AVMS directive has put in place some obligations upon audiovisual services in relation to the promotion of European works. So in traditional broadcasting services, a broadcaster must allocate a majority proportion of their broadcasting time to European works and 10% of their broadcasting time or programming budget to independent works. However, this concept of works is not defined or is quite broad and includes more generally programs. But the directive allows some degree of flexibility, and member states can impose more stricter rules or more detailed rules. And as we can see in this map, 12 countries have chosen to do so and created sub-quotas specifically targeting cinematographic films or works in original national language. Also, on VOD services, since 2007, the directive has put in place some obligations. And in 2018, the directive has strengthened these obligations to create a level playing field between broadcasters and on-demand services. And under this Article 13.1, the member states must ensure that on-demand services under their jurisdiction offer at least 30% of European work in their catalogue, and that they give prominence to those works. So where do we stand? We see on this map that most all countries have put in place such quotas, including some European Economic Area countries, Liechtenstein and Iceland, one EFTA country, Switzerland, and the UK have this 30% quota. We can see also that some countries like France, for example, has gone much beyond with a 60% quota. In addition, we see also that 8 countries with the little spot have put in place some sub-quotas here too to address specific goals, like either promoting works by independent producers or cinema films or works in original national language. Among them, for example, Italy is quite ambitious, which requires the 3 sub-quotas. There is a 70% general quota for original Italian works, wherever produced in the last 5 years by independent producers, and 27% of these works, of these 70% sub-quota, shall go to cinema films. We see also that France and Portugal have 2 sub-quotas, France requiring feature films, plus 40% of original French language works. And Portugal too has put in place a 15% quota to independently produced European creative works, originally produced in Portuguese less than 5 years ago. And for the remaining 5 countries, the main sub-quota is targeting works produced in the national language. Having a look at another example at these key principles supporting the approach at policy level is the concept of independent producer. So the question is the promotion of your independent producers a guarantee for a diverse offer of films and maybe successful films? But what does independent means in terms of legal issues? So we have done a mapping at the observatory, and we found out that this criteria of independence is assessed based on several criteria, mainly 3 categories. The financial independence, and this is assessed through 3 main questions. Who own the production company, so the ownership criteria. How much of the producer's content is supplied to a single audiovisual media service provider, so that's the content supply criteria. And the ability to finance of the producer. In other words, can the producer finance parts of the production themselves without relying entirely on outside sources? So the second important criteria that we found out is the operational independence. Does the producer have the freedom to make their own creative and business decisions? And finally, the criteria of the ownership of intellectual property rights. Does the producer retain control over their own IP? And here too, we have done a little mapping. So there is 2 ways to judge independence. You can have it from the film fund criteria, access to some funding. Many film funds require the producer to be independent. But you have also the criteria for the quotas, these 10% obligation to have independent works. So in this map, you have an overview of the criteria used for the film funding eligibility. And what we see is that 15 countries use these ownership criteria, shown here in blue, to define what qualifies an independent producer to access public funding. But among these 15 countries, most of them rely on one single criteria, but we can also see some variety because others combine it with other criteria, like operational independence and ownership, or ownership and content supply, or just operational independence. And just for your information, this criteria is also the main one which is used, the ownership criteria, for the purpose of the quota in 23 countries. So we can see here that there is a common trend in Europe, but also some degree of variety among countries when it comes to the way it is implemented. So with this in mind, I will stop right now with one question to you to tell us, is this diversity a guarantee for success for films, for diversity? And I will hand over to you for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, for this insightful background information, which will be very useful for our discussion. And we have looked at tools, but the overarching goal is diversity. So I'm looking at you, Agnieszka, since we may be easier to start from a public institution point of view. How does diversity drive your work at a BFI? How do you manage also to keep pace with technological and market developments? These tools are there since quite a long time. Are they flexible enough? And how do you approach this goal of diversity?
Okay, so first to address the issue of diversity, for us, as for many other funders across the continent, I'm sure, diversity is one of the overarching principles for provision of public funding. And we understand diversity in the UK in the widest possible sense through all the protected characteristics from ethnicity, sex, gender, belief. And now, increasingly, we're also looking into disability and socioeconomic background, because this is also where the gaps are. That are we sufficiently disability friendly in our sector, because these are also audiences, and if they are unable to come to cinema, we're losing out. So diversity in our support is, again, first in creation, so that stories that are made cater to the widest spectrum of audience. Undiscovered narratives, new narratives to be first seen rather than repetition of usual tropes. So we're trying to de-risk that process of creation. But I think diversity in audiences is also very important. And I'm proud to say that BFI is doing a lot of that work as well. So it is about finding new audiences, what to do with people who just are not interested in cinema. What if they became interested in cinema? We would be increasing audiences. So we're experimenting with that. There's a project led by my colleague here, who's actually in the audience, which is called Escapes, where once a month we offer 3 screenings. And there's a very sophisticated marketing, localized marketing machinery around those screenings to really attract people who normally don't go to cinema. Because they're our prize, right? It's like if people already like cinema, they're going. But what about those audiences that are not there? And then other sort of diversity-related ideas within the audience realm would be, is there a cinema where you are? Are you able to go to cinema? It's not even about the choice, but do you have ability to go to the cinema? So here again, we are thinking about not only increasing that base, but improving that base so that cinema experience is really a positive one. Because we know that for cinema buffs, even if the roof is leaking, they will forgive us. But most of the customers go and expect a pleasant, comfortable experience with good equipment and cozy seats. So we're looking into this to help cinemas within like capital and core funding to improve the experience. Yeah, so that's the 2 points, that the diversity is in supply and in demand as well. In terms of technological development, well, we do support experimentation from our filmmakers, and it's to do with the completely new genres and categories of projects that they may wish to get out to the world in immersive and XR space. And I think also this ambition to improve cinema experience is also to do with technology. And again, disability comes to mind, that you can improve audio description and all those new devices that will help people experience cinema. Like blind people like to go to cinema. And how do we help them have the best experience possible? So we're thinking about all that.
That's a lot, Agnieszka. I think it's very inspiring, and also in particular this thought about how to reach the audience, and maybe we can come back to that afterward, Peter, from the exhibitor's point of view, because this is, of course, crucial. The film needs to reach its audience, but in an attractive place where people want to go. That's clear. But before coming back to that, I wanted to go to Mattis to make a little step before. That's the production step. There is a lot. I mean, according to observatory figures, we had in last year 2,514 feature films. That's many. That's a huge number. So the question is there an audience for all these films? It's the highest figure on record, I think, Gilles, no? If I don't... 2,514 films, feature films in Europe in 2024. So is this in itself a sign of diversity? Is less more? Is there a more nuanced picture? You as a producer, how do you see this? You produce a very successful films, but there are many films that don't reach that level of success, many films that nobody sees. So what would be your take, your advice? Is less more? Is more good?
Well, I think that there are many undiscovered gems. There are many films that maybe excellent, but nobody watches them for different reasons. Some of those are that the marketing isn't targeted correctly. Some of those are that the film just gets lost somewhere and the producers haven't done their job well. So I think when we look at that number, I think the amount of successful films based on this criteria wouldn't be nearly as high. But on the other side, I think that there's a lot of importance in diversifying production processes. For example, Flow was a film which we could only do because we had a very specific non-industry standard production process. And this is something that many of these films do. It's experimentation in terms of theme, in terms of production process, in terms of you know, just thinking about new directions that cinema can take. And some of these type of films don't exactly reach large audiences, but at some point they can be very important in terms of how cinema as a medium creatively advances, because some tools or tricks that they use are then taken over by other projects that may be very, very successful. So I think we have to look at this holistically and think of diversity in many, many senses.
That sounds like a very good advice, and it depends, of course, a lot also on the producer, on how they do their job. So there is no one recipe for all. That's clear.
Yeah.
We heard in Sophie's presentation about independent producers. There has been a lot about this also here in Cannes. There was a charter signed the other day. There is a lot about it also in the conclusions of the council that were recently made public. But nobody really speaks about independence of the other part of the value chain, of sales agents, distributors, exhibitors. Is this on purpose? Should it be discussed? For example, in Italy, there are provisions on independent distributors, but it's a little exceptions to my feeling. So I would like to ask this question to basically to the three of you, actually, to Valeska, Peter, and Huub, to see your point of view on how it is to be independent. If I'm not mistaken, the three of you are a good example of independent actors to a wide extent. Is this an advantage? Could it also be better in other places, so maybe to have shoulders that are stronger? My question would be, maybe you want to start, Valeska, just to follow the value chain. We do sales agent, distributor, exhibitor.
Well, let's say like this. Of course, I think for me, or like for us as a company, as we exist, Film Boutique, it's of course a big advantage to be independent, because we make our own choices. We do basically what we want to do. And of course, I think like if the sales agents would not be so much independent anymore, that you belong to groups that have a certain kind of line, then of course I think then the diversity that we promote with our films might be in danger as well, because bigger groups are, of course, we all want to make profits with our professions, yeah. But we can still guide, which is not so much the case anymore, I guess. When you belong to a big group, of course, decisions will be made, but the financial thing will become more and more, important. So, and the tendency will go to a more and more certain kind of film, to bigger productions, to more money, to more stars, and so on. And I think that is a big danger for the diversity of films that we want to promote. And I cannot agree more to what he said before, that there are a lot of small gems that are hidden in the chain, that people cannot see, that maybe they will have the exposure through festivals and so on, but they will not make it to the theatrical in the end. And that, of course, that's a problem where we all somehow have to work on. And I think their main goal can be, as Agnieszka said, or it should be, I think, that there is also more support and more like engagement in like audience research, film education, I think, is one of the things that is extremely important, and it's extremely neglected, I have the impression as well. Like, we need to think about the audience of tomorrow, yeah, but nobody does somehow. It's absurd, yeah. And of course, quotas, criteria are very important. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of quotas, yeah. But we need to see if these quotas work in the end. So they have to be, it's not enough just to put a quota and then say, okay, we're done with that, we took care of it, but you have to access that and like to evaluate like from time to time to see, do the quotas work? Do we have to adjust? Do we need to do things? And I think, especially in terms of diversity, it's important that the whole value chain is supported. Yeah, in order that we can do the job that we're doing and not everything becomes the same.
Yeah, that's clear. And the quotas, they come in the end after your job. So how do you do to detect these undiscovered gems? I mean, you have a freedom of maneuver, you're independent, but there is, you discover them through the festivals, if the producer does a job. Otherwise, it's complicated, I guess, no, to find them, because it's how does the film reach its audience? There has to be scouting activity.
Yeah, it's a scouting activity. It's that's something that, I mean, of course, we have a person that is in charge of acquisitions, or you have a team if you have a bigger company that is constantly traveling, watching stuff, being in touch with the producers, attending markets, project markets, work in progress sessions, reading script, watching films, to see a little bit where do the trends go, what could be interesting, what is a little bit different. And yes, of course, that's the job.
Yeah.
That's the fun.
I bet so. So let's assume Valeska has done her job brilliantly, as I'm sure she does, and then it's your turn, Hub. You distribute. Mm-hmm. And how does independence play on you? And how do you proceed until we reach, in the end, Peter's area of the exhibitors?
Yes, well, I think independence is key to the way we work, because we managed to be very agile and also take risks that otherwise wouldn't be possible. I was just thinking of the example of No Other Land, for example. I think we were the only distributor interested in the Netherlands, and it was a relatively small film when we acquired it, and it's become a very, very relevant film, partly because we supported it, but of course the film itself was really in demand, and it's been shown at the European Parliament. It had a huge cultural impact and political impact as well, I think. And I think if you're part of a larger group, especially a very large group, somebody up there is going to say, don't touch that, we're not going to go there. This is because there was a controversy in Berlin. And so this is just one example, but there's many, many examples of, we just do what we like, and of course we always have, because we are a business, we need to survive, and we are always also looking at potential. So it's always hard. For me, we're small, so we can't see everything. It's impossible. Well, 2,500 films, no company on earth can watch all those films. So of course there are gems that are hidden, but I tend to believe that the ecosystem functions fairly well. So I do think that a lot of things do surface, and because of all these independent companies searching the market, most of them, that at least the ones that have potential, because that's our job to assess that. And of course we are not perfect, we are not machines, and we are always surprised, and this is part of the fun, we project what we can do with the film, and sometimes we have a pleasant surprise, like No Other Land. It's a fantastic success financially as well, and culturally, so it's a very gratifying thing as a distributor to find such a film and then to get it out there. But sometimes we're disappointed, so it doesn't work. And we thought, this is a fantastic film. We paid a big MG, and it just doesn't fly.
That was my question now. What about flops? You believe in a film, and
every distributor,
the audience really does not like it.
No, yeah, or there's all kinds of things at play. I can do a very concrete example. We bought La Cocina in Berlin, and we really, really, really loved the film. And we thought this is going to be a big success. All the films about kitchens have been fantastic successes. So we were in competition with another distributor, I still don't know who. And they kept raising the price, and we just, we thought, this is going to be fantastic. And it wasn't. I mean, it's well, and part of the problem, now I finally analyze, because that's also what we do. We try to be very self-critical. Why did it not work? What was the thing? But there's several things at play. One of them is that that didn't find a US distributor that really pushed the film. But there were also a couple of things in the story and in the film itself that didn't appeal as much to people as we thought it would. But anyway, the flops are really part of life as well. So, it's our
That's the risk of your business.
Yeah, and that's also the fun of it. But of course, you need to have more successes than flops, because otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here. And still we manage, yeah.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
So now let's move on, and let's say Hubert's done a fantastic job, as Valeska did, and now it comes to you, Peter. You have now to choose where to screen these films, and Svenska Bio, as far as I understand, has screenings opportunities with different sizes. How do you do your work in order to ensure that you get to the right audience and that the room is full?
First, I want to rephrase what Hub said about we do what we like. I think we do what we love to be in this industry. But what we do is, of course, I have a team of people who screen the movies. And if you have a movie like a big studio movie, it's sort of easier to figure out. You look on the numbers of the previous movies, they go wide. When it comes to the independent movies, it's more tricky. You have really to nurture those. You have to screen those movies, and you have to figure out what playability can you give them, and is always going wide the best first day one, the best thing for this movie, or should it percolate? And that's the thing you have to discuss with the distributor, because at the end it's their property and they decide over their movie, and we can only advise and offer them. But the best thing for us is if we find a movie that we can play for a long time. And many years ago, before digitalization would happen, we discussed how would the landscape look once everything is available, when prints is not sort of a small zone to get through. How many prints will we get on this picture? We can get prints on every picture on every theater. And we came to the conclusion that the one with most screens will win that game, because then because we basically have small and mid-sized markets besides a couple of art houses in Stockholm. And we figured if we start to develop more screens, we can keep the more movies on the screen, have a more attractive offer to the consumer, but also we can keep the movies and hope that some of them will find an audience at a smaller capacity, but just can keep playing. So, but this is nothing you can do with some kind of algorithm. You have to be, certain markets works this way. This market likes horror movies, this likes art movies, and you have to know this. And this is a skill that my programming team try to hone all the day.
And you are a family business, basically, so one couldn't be more independent, let's say, in terms of choices. Is this something you feel as an advantage? Coming back to the discussion, independent producers is something that is formalized in law. Do you see this coming to also your professions, or is this to be confined to production?
Well, it's 111 years since my grandfather started in this industry, and I'm grateful every day I wake up that he started in this industry. But the thing is, we can make quick decisions. We don't have to sort of go through a corporate hierarchy. And I also think that something that when the MBAs took over Hollywood, some of the showmanship got lost. And I think that for us it's important that we get visits from talent, we get people, directors and talent out to the movie theaters to meet the audience. And I think that we can make, sometimes you can have to make decisions which may be financially not rewarding in the short term, but in the long term it builds an audience, and we can do that. And sometimes let's just do that. We lose money short term, but it's fun, and our audience is going to love this.
Well, that's a courageous choice, which also closes a bit the circle with what you said, Agnieszka, about the importance of finding also new audiences, young people who are maybe not that interested, and then you believe in them and you try to propose something meaningful. We have touched upon various items during this first round: how to reach audiences, talent scouting, business risks, flops and successfulness, and how it is to be independent. But all this would not be possible without funding, and this is going to be our next chapter. So I would like now to call up on stage again Martin Kanzler and Sophie Vallet for a little introduction to this second round of this session, where we're going to look into the financing mix. How is this made possible thanks to the fact that the state believes in cinema? So Martin, floors to you first, and then Sophie continues.
Yes, a couple of brief insights on the role of public support for the European film industry. Simplifying a bit, but the main tools of public support are direct public funding, production incentives, and then, of course, the financial obligations for AVM, audiovisual service providers, to invest directly or indirectly. And we have some insights on the role of direct public funding and incentives on the financing of European fiction films. We do not have any data yet on the impact and the share that comes through the financing obligations, however. But even those two parts show that almost 50% of the cumulative production budget of European fiction films is being financed by public support. And linked to what I mentioned earlier, that films are primarily exploited on their national markets, it's also logical to see that the role of public funding increases, or is more important. The more important, the smaller the market is. So in the large markets, the share, the films can be financed with less public support, but in small markets, that share goes up to 66%. So public support is absolutely crucial in financing European productions. And this share of public support has increased over time, significantly increased, and that increase comes exclusively through an increasing role of support through incentives. So the share of the financing plans that comes from production incentives has doubled between 2016 and 22, from 10 to 20%, while the share of direct public funding has remained stable but decreased marginally, but not significantly. So that's one insight. Public funding is absolutely crucial, and it has been growing, the importance, and particularly the importance of incentives. It was already mentioned before, we also have data on the breakdown of what do funds support, and as has been for, well, since I joined the observatory and probably way before, the majority of direct public funding, but also incentive, goes to support the production and development. On the pan-European level, it's 62% of the national funds support goes to production and development. And in case of the subnational funds, it's an estimated 80%. So the BFI is an exception in the European funding landscape with the opposite proportions. 11% of national goes to exhibition, and then to equal parts between 4 and 6% to distribution, festival, markets, promotion, and training. And perhaps two last things. The majority of direct public funding, particularly outside of France, is, or at least in 22, was selective. Unfortunately, 22 is the last year for which we have data, because even there we have seen that there is a trend, a growing trend towards automatic funding. So between 2018 and 22, the amounts of automatic funding have increased much stronger than selective funding, which has basically stagnated. And now Germany has basically transformed the entire selective into an automatic scheme. So there clearly is a trend, particularly outside of France, towards more automatic funding. And those are a couple of insights with regard to the direct public funding and the role of incentives. and I'll hand over to Sophie to talk a bit about what we know about the financial investment obligations.
So, going back to this AVMS directive, since 2018, member states have been given greater flexibilities in how they support European content. So Article 13.2 allows the member states to go further in terms of financing European works. They can require the audiovisual services under their jurisdiction to invest directly in European content or to contribute to national film funds. And if a provider is based in another EU countries but targets their national audience, the rule can also be applied to them as well. So this financial contribution must be fair, proportionate, and non-discriminatory. And unlike the quota and the prominence rules, this investment obligation is purely optional on the part of the member states. So let's have a look at how and if countries do apply these possibilities. As you can see here on this map, for linear services, 14 countries have already chosen to introduce such financial obligations for their broadcasting services. And out of these 14 countries, 8 apply the obligation not only to the domestic providers, but also to the services based in other countries and targeting their national audience. As you can see in this map, the countries in yellow. Looking now in the on-demand services, it's even more. 16 countries have already introduced such financial obligations for on-demand services on their territory. And out of these 16, only one country, Slovakia, doesn't apply these to services based outside of their territory and targeting the national audience. And on top of these 16 countries, more countries are also thinking of developing such system, thinking of Ireland, who is developing some rules, Norway and Sweden. So in terms of how this financial obligation is implemented, there are different types of financial obligations. It can take the form of direct contributions, such as investment in production or the acquisition of rights, or of an indirect contribution, such as a contribution to a film fund or a levy. So in some cases, both types are required. So these are cumulative obligations, like we can see in dark orange in this map. And in other cases, the providers can choose between the two. That's alternative obligations, as in light orange in this map. And in some countries, the rules vary also on whether the provider is domestic or targeting the national market from abroad, and also the type or the level of the contribution may vary. So with this, does this diversity of approaches is a guarantee for success to film, or is it a challenge? And this, I leave the question for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you, Martin. Now, we have seen the tools, money, both from the funding, both from the other players of the ecosystem. But I would like to get a little back to you, Agnieszka, and the film funds, because you were a bit singled out. Now, the UK seems to be a quite tax incentive intensive, let's say, model, and you have just launched a new support scheme, which is called UK Independent Film Tax Credit, so yet another one. So I was wondering why this choice of going with automatic systems. Is this the good recipe for selecting successful films? And then, if you allow me, at the end, a little remark on, I think, what everyone is curious about. What about now what's going to happen after the Trump effect and the announcement that has been made on the 100% tariffs, since the UK is certainly one of the countries that are very much going to be impacted by this. But we'll leave that to the end, just so that you can think about it. I think many are curious. But let's start with the model, this tax incentives versus direct funding.
So yes, this is true that tax incentives in terms of volume are the lion's share of public support in the UK. How much money is spent from public purse to support film and TV and games and children's TV and animation. The most money is distributed from the budget to the projects through tax incentives. The selective funds are much smaller share of that whole pie. There's many reasons for that. One of them could be, I think, that the tax incentives have been quite a success story in the UK because they are quite instrumental in attracting large levels of production into the UK as one of the global production hubs. So the tax incentives are liked by our government and the Treasury because there's clear evidence that they bring benefits because of this increased business that is attracted to the UK. Then there's clear correlation with contribution to the economy. Who benefits from those tax incentives is incoming productions, but also domestic productions. Everybody who spends money on film, TV, games in the UK benefits from those incentives. So they're also very useful for our independent domestic producers. And then you can also sort of finesse the scheme. And what you just mentioned is exactly that. In order to address the needs of our domestic producers with their lower budget films than the American studio films, there has just been this very tactical change introduced, which is the enhanced rate for films under 23 million pounds to be benefiting from the relief of up to 15 million. And those films need to either have British director or writer, which is not required for the usual tax relief, or they have to be official co-production under treaty. So this enhanced rate gives our independent producers more oomph, if you like. They can do more now with tax incentives because the rate is more or less 40% of the UK core spend in comparison with more or less 25 for those higher rate budgets. So it is a kind of straightforward automatic instrument, but you can tailor it more to specific needs. And that was the voice of our independent producers being heard, who were saying, you know, we have a fantastic industry in the UK, but really our own domestic independent producers have been finding it harder and harder to get films across the line. And now that increased rate should make quite a game-changing difference.
So this is a sort of reserved scheme, let's say, and which avoids the shower effect of tax incentives, which go everywhere, basically. So this way you manage to target it towards the weaker ones, let's say. And
absolutely, absolutely. And also I'd say that producers like it too, because there's no cap in annual spend on tax money. It's just that if you are within the rules, you will get the support. So there's no usual gatekeepers and applications and long waiting times. So that support is also appreciated by producers for the ease of use.
That sounds like great, and it just started, right? Yeah. On the other question, you don't have comments, I assume.
Well,
on the Trump affair.
I'd just say today, I'll say we have this very, very dear saying in the UK, which is keep calm and carry on. Right? That comes from Second World War, and you can imagine the analogy here. But to be serious, we just don't know enough about those audacious proposals to react to them with fear or not, but we just really, we are in intense conversations with colleagues across the Atlantic and in Europe to just find out more and understand better the detail of the proposals. Because one thing which is quite clear is that they don't appear to be very sort of specific to our sector. And we are more puzzled than concerned, I think.
Okay, well then, we'll hear more in the future as soon as they get more concrete. And thank you for giving the point of view on this, which is of general interest, of course. Producers were mentioned, then it's natural to go back to you, Mattis. You told us already in the opening session about this financing mix that you put together. It sounded very complex, huh? 3 co-producers, both direct funding, tax incentives, a bit of everything. How difficult was this as an experience? And how do you think this played a role for the success of your film?
Yeah, I think it had a huge impact on the success of the film because, well, first of all, we were only able to do the film because it was the sort of co-production that it was. In Latvia, we simply do not have the workforce to pull off a feature-length 3D animated film. So if it hadn't been for the French co-production and for the French funding and for the French regional funding that supported it, the animation part of the film, which is moving the characters, would never have happened, at least at the level that it is right now. All the other stuff we could do in Latvia by ourselves, like the preparatory work and the post-production work, but that character animation was super essential to this project, and if it hadn't been for the support of the French and Belgium different funds and different institutions, that wouldn't have happened at the kind of level of quality that it has. I think it was difficult because we are a small country that wants to retain the majority. So what was very, very helpful on the Latvia side was that the National Film Fund gave us a really huge grant for the time and for the level of experience that we had at the time. And that was a sign of a lot of trust. And I think that the international funders then were more open to supporting the project as well, because they saw how much support the project got on its home ground. So our home support was extremely, extremely important, especially in terms of public support. We had problems, of course, on the way in terms of financing, and because this project is not an industry standard project in the sense that development, pre-production, and production kind of are all together in a mix. There's not set boundaries between them. So there was a phase when we were still fundraising, and it was initially a co-production with Germany, and there was I would even want to call this a cultural issue, where the German funders, televisions, and other potential sources of financing just didn't get the project, I would say. Like they didn't find, I guess, the right box to place it into, and they thought that it wouldn't find an audience in Germany, and now there's, I think, 200,000 admissions or something like that in theaters alone. So so that was problematic. But then we made the switch very late on in the process when we understood that Germany just wasn't going to go with this project, and we switched to Belgium to kind of fill the gap that we had, because and again, Belgium and France, both French-speaking territories, so a good co-production in that sense. So yeah, it's very, very important to also take into account that Plan A it may not always work, and Plan B tends to always be the better one, as it does. So so yeah. So of course we always were thinking about alternatives, and that's also important when you're thinking about the financing process. You have to realize that maybe of what you put on paper for the first kind of big draft of the financing plan, maybe 50% of that will come true in the best case scenario, and for the rest of the 50% you have to think about alternatives, especially for projects that are not as that, because they're innovative, they may not be as clear on certain criteria that the industry expects, like the target audience and the you know, how it's going to be marketed and things like that, because that's something that we were still figuring out as we went, to be honest, how to do all of these things. And
difficult even to know at the beginning how to meet the audience. So that's also the risk factor that we discussed earlier. Speaking of risk, Peter, I remember that some years ago here in Cannes at an observatory event, you said that public funding was scattered among too many films. So I'm curious now, we are 3 years after. Has your view evolved? Is it the situation the same? And given the abundance, we said 2,514 feature films produced last year, and around 2,000 of these get public funding, which is a vast majority. How do you cherry pick your choices in this abundance?
Well, we had 400 movies released theatrically in Sweden last year. That's more than one a day. So I think that says it all. So I think less is more. I think also the new leadership at the Swedish Film Institute agrees, and they will they will fund less projects with more money, and I think that's the right way to go.
Who you wanted to react to this from your
that?
point of view? Yeah, I saw.
Well, it's a complicated issue because, yes, also in our territory, I'm not sure about the exact number, but I think it's around 400 as well. So everybody feels, on the one hand, that the market is oversaturated in a way, but at the same time, you know, there are young, new distributors coming to the market. I think in recent months there are 2 new distributors that entered the market, so they see a future for themselves. Of course, because of digitization, it's so much easier to get into the theaters, so this plays a big part. It's a very complicated issue, I think, you know, but I would agree in a sense that less is more. I mean, and that, you know, producers and directors should really be aware of, you know, if they make a theatrical film, you know, how will that, you know, play in the end. And I mean, and I know that the funds and there's a lot of focus in the public bodies on achieving this, and I know it's also very difficult, so I appreciate their efforts. One of the key things I think in the Netherlands now is that really to try and let talent properly flourish, if you know what I mean, instead of, you know, overproducing it as a fund. And I think this is a trend in a wider European context, but it's not the only thing. You know, there is a lot of things at play. Also, collaboration down the line. I was going to say also in the previous little thing that it's crucial that the work, you know, the sales agents, distributors and theaters collaborate on marketing a film, and you cannot always force it because also the theaters are flooded with films. I'm very aware of it, but I also am aware that when we have a film that they really want and they really do the job, it is crucial to the success of the film. It really plays a big part. They you know, it fits in front of the web page, if the poster is hanging correctly, if the trailer is put out. All these little details play a crucial part.
You mentioned overproduction. Does this mean that there is too much money to production and too little for your side of the chain? And this maybe I will ask also to you, Valeska.
Well, I mean, obviously, since we are the most risky part of the business, it would make sense, I think, to support it more. And of course, the media program is very important to, I think, to all of our colleagues in Europe, especially the independent ones. You know, I think most of the companies, especially the art house, the bigger art house companies, but also the smaller ones, they almost couldn't survive without it, and it really allows us to take these risks I was talking about. And you know, and to really support that cultural diversity and all these other things. But yeah, and of course there are, I should mention this, many territories have specific support for the export of their films. Italy, the UK is now starting. It's a little bit bumpy still, but I'll leave that out of the discussion. But it's a great initiative that is there. And many other countries have that. But on a national level, it's much more complicated. We hardly have any support locally for as distributors, and it's always P&A support, and which is great, and I think it makes sense as well. But it doesn't really mitigate. It mitigates some of the risk, and it really does help in the back of our minds also. So it does. Fulfill its objective in that sense. You know, if we think, okay, it's a German film, we can apply it Germany, it might just give us that little push that we needed, even though the film is always the first and the last thing that on our minds. But you know, yeah.
Yeah, it's an important reflex to have.
It is. It is. It plays a part in the decision process.
I think Agnieszka wanted quickly to react, and then I'll go to you,
very
Agnieszka.
quickly wanted to react. Thank you for mentioning the support that it's called the UK Global Screen Fund that helps with the festival launch and also with P&A costs for distributors in other countries than the UK. But why I wanted to jump in is to say that it doesn't exist yet. But again, we are thinking of making the case to the government for tax reliefs for distributors. So again, it's just to reduce the risk.
Is this an announcement? It's a premiere.
It's not anytime soon, but it is to open your mind. And again, it's not all about production. We will not make European films more successful by pumping money into production alone. So just like producers need to de-risk their outlays, the same should be applying to distributors. We'll see how it goes, whether the government hears our arguments, but that's kind of being considered.
Sounds very promising, doesn't it? Yeah.
I cannot agree more, of course. No, but what is very obvious, or what became very obvious, especially after COVID, is while it maybe did not make a difference before, but now it's making a difference if you have a national support for a film, if the film is eligible for media. It makes a difference from the distributor side to buy a film or not. So we are all joking about it, but there is one of the first questions often is the film eligible for media?
True.
And of course, and national supports are more and more attractive as well, especially for non-European buyers. Yeah. So that is an important part, especially, and I think it gives security. Yeah, especially in terms of marketing budgets, everything became much more expensive within the European Union after COVID. So people need some, at the same time, the numbers of the cinemas are not there again where we had been pre-COVID. So it is a support that is important, it's crucial, and it's a right sign in the right direction that you care about the whole chain. And it's exactly as Agnieszka said, just pumping money into production will not make all these films meet an audience. Yeah, so you need to invest in something like that as well, and that is as well to foster diversity again. Yeah,
that was exactly my point here. So
it's a cycle. Yeah, and as Huub was saying, we want to take risks. We want to have more diverse projects. We want to have little gems and believe in them, but we need the support as well.
No, that's clear. It's a risky business, and support makes your choices less hard. So I understand that the eligibility criteria for media would then have a nice effect down the chain and also ensure that more diverse films would be shown.
Totally that, and as well, I want to engage as well for the national supports, yeah, because it's important as well. I mean, in many countries, distributors don't have national support, sales agents neither, yeah. So it's a thing that I think should be more on the map of lots of funds as well.
Sounds like a good recipe. Unless you want to make a final remark, I think we have time for some Q&A from the audience, which is always a nice moment of interaction. So there will be a portable mic circulating, and I see a hand raised here. If you can, and another one here in front. So if my colleagues could kindly bring a microphone, and then you state your name and your affiliation, please, so that we know who is talking. I think the gentle person here, the hat came first. Jordinka first, and then another one here, and another one here.
Thank you very much. My name is Gabriele Sindler. I'm on the board of the Screenwriters Association of Germany, and I would state that if money should be shifted, it should not only be shifted to the end of the chain, but also very much in the development phase. So filmmaking is very cheap on paper, as long as it's on paper. And our experience, and I also have a evaluation company in Switzerland. As we evaluated films, 80% of the European films either have not a completely told story, or it is not adapted properly to the screen. So if you could imagine One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest ending at the boat strip, that's the state of the development of the most of European films. And that's really a pity. And so we should invest very much in the early stage of development.
So the message is not only to production and to the end, but also the first phase. And I guess this might also resonate here for the catching of the good stories. We had a remark from here, and then the gentleman here in front row. Please.
My name is a silent microphone. Philip Bergson. I created the Oxford International Film Festival, which was the first ever in Great Britain recognized by FIAP, competitive for feature films, precisely because I had been attending Cannes and other festivals as a broadcaster with the BBC and as a film critic, and wonderful European films, not only European, but particularly European, were not coming to England, and that was why I created the festival. It's a few years ago now, and the situation is even worse now than it used to be. And I wonder why you do not perhaps consider thinking it could be, with all this wonderful expertise, you have not mentioned the biggest curse not in the room, which is the streamer and the Netflix and the Amazon, without which many films would not be made, that's absolutely true, but which on the other hand is stopping audiences going to see the films where they should be seen in a cinema on a big screen. Oda?
Do the streamers prevent people from coming? What's your feeling? Peter, maybe you first, since they're coming to you.
I think that the dust is starting to settle after the COVID crisis, and I think most streamers, except one, who claims are supporting the theatrical distribution. You look on a company like Amazon, they just announced that they're going to release 15 movies theatrical next year. So most streamers are starting to understand the added value the theaters brings to it. So I think when everything is sort of settling down, I think we're getting to a more normal world. But there is one big streamer who absolutely is hostile to our sector and called it recently. The head of that streamer said, we're an outdated model, and unless you live in Manhattan, you cannot go to a movie theater. And they have a lot of money, and so I really think it comes down to that the talent who makes their movies has to make a choice where they want to make them. And so far, I have not met any filmmaker who says, I can't wait to have my film opening on an iPad or on a telephone. I really would like to. So I really think it comes down to the talent to demand a theatrical release to have their movies on the screen. But I agree with you that the streamers has sort of been a threat, but I think that they are now getting in line with understanding that we add value to it. And you know what? The theatrical experience does not exclude the streaming experience. But the sad thing is, it doesn't work the other way around. If you stream the movie first, there's no audience left to go to the movie theaters.
Very clear. Any other perceptions, agreements?
I think it's also that cinemas are an evolving business. and they are and will find the way to thrive in this streamer ecosystem. The first crisis was when television came, right? And you would use that analogy to say that small screen in your living room prevented people from going to cinema. But they still keep going to cinema, and they will continue to do so, because there's nothing that can replace this shared experience in the dark room. And I think, yeah, we will not see the demise of cinemas. We just see them transforming in reaction to changes in the sector.
Maybe as well, like one of the biggest differences, I think, between the streamers and the theatrical is there's no curation on the platforms. I mean, that's what we do here. Yeah, we curate films, we select films, we make a choice for the audience, what we think can resonate with them. And that is like most of the streamers do exactly the other way around. They just produce a lot of content that they put on the platform, and nobody understands anymore what to watch. Yeah. What is, of course, for me personally, the pity is that, as Peter already said, I mean, I think we are open to work with the platforms, but I mean, we have to all to understand it's an ecosystem and it's a value chain. Somehow, streamers and TVs tend as well more to go in the direction to produce their own content. They don't want to work with the content we have here. It could be so wonderful. We could be all like in the same chain and support and maximize the visibility of the films. But instead of everybody is, as you would say in Germany, brewing their own soup. Yeah, and that, yeah, is.
That's a very good point, I think. Yeah. Yeah, and well, and this goes for TV and the streamers. I mentioned this before at the start that it would be maybe a good idea to extend this quota to existing cinema films, and just to force is a big word, but to
warmly encourage
streamers and television stations to program European cinema, and then of course respecting the window system.
Great.
This sparks some interest.
In front here, and then two hands in the back.
Philip, can you hear me? My name is Philip Altman from the Guardian newspaper in the UK. My question is a sort of follows on from the question about the Trump effect that you mentioned earlier. I think the impact on the British film production is sort of obvious where it might be felt, but I wondered whether on any other parts of this supply chain or fragile ecosystem of film production and distributions that you represent, whether you can see any other consequences of a sort of act of creative destruction coming from America, whether negative or even unintended positives.
The only thing I can think, because I find it very hard to envisage what the effect would be, especially in for my own position as a very small independent, because the Americans have always been quite dominant. But one key thing I think that might be disruptive, even apart from the financial things, is that we collaborate very well in the Netherlands among distributors. We have a distributors organization in which the Americans play a crucial role, and they are very, very accommodating. And once they start, I'm a little bit afraid that when tensions arise in their headquarters, how that will reflect on our collaboration. But I find it very difficult to envisage what exactly the measures would be and how that would impact. But I do know that the influence of the studios is and the level of freedom that they had so far was very, very big. So I just hope that this continues, and yeah, that's all I can say actually. Yeah.
We'll discover soon, I guess. There was a hand over there, and then another one afterwards. I would like to maybe privilege those who haven't spoken yet. So please, yeah.
Hi, hello. I think my question will be for Mr. Rolvink. So I worked on a feature documentary on the production side, and it was a truly humbling experience to contact all those distribution companies to try to sell the movie. And I'm wondering, like, do you have any tricks? Because you said you cannot watch 2,500 movies. So should we send you a box of chocolate with the DVD in it? Should we win prize at film festival? Like, should we have the best A-listers? Because, and to finish on that, like, the director had won an Emmy Award, like in feature doc. I'm not going to say who. And to be honest, he was also truly humbled by the experience of like, wow, I won this prize years ago, and now no one is. A few people watched the film, and we still managed to be happy about it. But still, it was, yeah. Just wondering, what should we do for next time?
Well, the easiest thing would be to go to one of the most prominent sales agents and make sure you get selected in Cannes and win a prize, and then we'll fight for your film. But in the meantime, I mean, it's a tough one. You know, it's really a matter of resources. You know, our key team consists of 3 people. We do the materials, the bookings, the marketing. Well, the marketing we outsource. So, but it's just a matter of, you know, time and headspace. And if your film would have really sparked, I would think, okay, this could be commercial. Then I might have, because it could work, but yeah, it's just a matter of, you know, it's hard to have good advice for you. Although chocolates are always welcome.
So there was a hand there, and then over here, and then I think we have to round up, unless there is a very short remark on your behalf. Please.
Hi, everyone. I'm an exhibitor in London, and I'm a bit confused because I'm also part of the Film Hub in London. We haven't been told anything about there being funds available to improve our auditoriums. So I'd like to know how we go about that. Also, Agnieszka, you said about it not destroying cinema television, but it decimated it down to, you know, like the Odeon, blah, blah, blah. And more recently, we've had stuff coming up like Everyman, Picture House. Picture House closed, what, 5 whole cinemas quite recently. So I think, you know, we do have to take it seriously.
Oh, no, don't get me wrong. I'm not taking it seriously. Just was trying to say that it's not doom and gloom. Cinemas close, but cinemas also open. And it is a tough time, obviously, and we are thinking of improving or enhancing our support. It doesn't exist yet, it's in the future, but we're bidding to the government for capital and core support for the cinemas. You may be aware of it, but it's the ambition and the goal at the moment, but at least it's important to be aware that we are fighting your fight. Okay.
We had a last comment over here, and then I think we really have to close.
Thank you all for the information you have shared with us. And I want to ask, in the very early beginning of the presentation, that we heard that generally films in Europe are targeting national markets. And is it possible, or how is it possible to shift it, to expand the target to whole Europe?
It's a big question.
Well, that's exactly the core of the work we do. Yeah, we want to, because we want to export the films to the world. Yeah, and of course, a national success can help to boost for non-national exploitation. But yeah, I mean, like if I look at my job, I can only say from my perspective, it's we need the festivals as the launching platform. That's the first step, yeah, to get as much attention and exposure from a festival that you can get from the press, from the distributors, from the exhibitors and so on. And then, of course, the more complicated one, I'm not sure if you're a producer, but we need stories that can transform to other places, yeah, to other cultures. We need something, at the same time, something unique, yeah. We need a story that hasn't been told like 10,000 times, or you can tell it as well, but it has to have a unique approach, maybe, yeah. So it's very hard to say, but we do our best, and we try hard to bring the films to other places all around the world. And festivals also play a crucial role, yeah. So if you cannot find distribution, try to submit your film to as many festivals as possible.
Thank you very much, and thank you also to the audience for having been so active, but time is running fast and we have to round up for today, not before having thanked our distinguished speakers. Thanks a lot to Peter Fornstam, Mattis Kasha, Agnieszka Moody, Valeska Neuhub Rulvink, and also to my colleagues for their contributions, Gilles Fontaine, Sophie Vallet, Martin Kanzler, but also colleagues behind the stage, Alison Heinduff, Amélie Lacour, Malia Milanova, and who have ensured that everything runs so smoothly. Before you go, let me just remind you about our stand. When you go out of here, it's just to the right, you should not miss it, and there are some freebies for you waiting there. 2 interesting publications, The Focus, this year's edition, and a publication on promotion of European works. And with this, just let me tell you that we will, of course, be back next year. So this is just an au revoir. And for now, enjoy the festival and goodbye.